Okay, there we are. So enjoy the lecture and take it away, Michael.
Thanks a million, Breed, and thanks to everyone for joining us, those who were here with us at Christmas and all the new faces and listeners as well. I'm Michael Fortune, I'm in County Wexford, and what I'm going to do with you this evening is just for about an hour, have a chat about St Brigid and St Brigid's Day. It won't be a big, deep academic presentation, it'll be just more about observations on things that we do here in Ireland, in different parts of Ireland, to mark this very, very special day. Today is the eve of St Brigid's Day, tomorrow is St Brigid's Day, and which also heralds the start of spring in Ireland, which is another very, very important date in our calendar. So listen, before I even start, there's so many stories around Brigid, but one of the first stories, the classic story that so many of us grew up with, was a story about St Brigid and her cloak. And as Breed mentioned earlier on, there was we'd worked with the National Library on traditional song projects, and here was one project we worked on 2 years ago called Songs for Our Children, and it's a song written by Catherine Ann Cullen from County Louth, who wrote the song about St Brigid. And St Brigid that she wrote about was the St Brigid from the St Brigid from County Louth, who now is claimed in County Kildare, but Catherine made sure she got Louth mentioned, and rightly so. So listen, I'm going to share my screen with you, and I'm going to let you have a listen to this song just to get you warmed up, and then we'll get back looking at images and videos and different things like that. So here is the song about Brigid's cloak. This is performed here by Aileen Lambert and my partner and our little one Nellie, and Aileen has just produced a video for children to teach children in school, so it's a very child-friendly little song, but it tells the classic story of Brigid that so many of us grew up with in Ireland.
There was a wise woman, we're all agreed. Some call her Bridget, some call her Breed. She grew up kind and she liked to joke, and she always wore a wee small cloak. About 1500 years ago, this strong young woman to Kildare did go to build a church made the common folk, with her 4 best friends and her wee small cloak. Now the King of Leinster had fields galore, so Brigid went knocking on his castle door. Would you give us a field by the old oak tree to build a church for my friends and me? Well, the mean old king, he gave a roar, saying, what kind of fool do you take me for? 'Cause nobody gets as rich as me by giving their fields to the poor for free. So Brigid smiled, would you grant instead the land as far as my cloak will spread? The king laughed loudly at her joke, 'cause she wouldn't cover much with her wee small cloak. To see how far the cloak would reach, her 4 best friends took a corner each. When she shouted go, they all set forth, walking east and west and south and north. The king was so mad he began to choke, and out of his ears came puffs of smoke. His mean old heart it nearly broke when he saw the measure of Brigid's cloak. But his heart was changed by Brigid's power, and his men built her chapel with a tall bell tower. Now they call it Kildare, the Church of the Oak, on the land that was covered by Brigid's cloak. So we hope.
Now, so that's a song called Brigid's Cloak, written by Catherine Ann Cullen, and I hope you enjoyed it. It's a lovely story that so many of us grew up with in primary school in Ireland, of St Brigid and her cloak. And I suppose so many of the things that I'm going to show you now are all revolving around stories around St Brigid, what we do. No one is right or wrong. We all just do things differently, and that's what makes it special. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with, I'm going to show you some photographs. Here's me holding a bunch of rushes. outside my grandmother's house in Ballygarrett in Macklemore in County Wexford. Now, every year as a child, we used to collect rushes, make crosses with my grandmother. She was 109 at the time when I was 101 at the time when I was making this with her. And what's lovely is I actually filmed it. It was in 2013. I'm going to hoosh down my videos now. I'm just going to show you the very end of it because it's just a lovely thing to watch. It's just me making the crosses with her. She was 101, just turned 101. But what's lovely for me is here she is making the crosses. I'm just going to play the last little clip for you. And it just goes on. I was going to move it on for you. It's tying up the crosses, and here's what she does next. She walks into her little kitchen, puts them in her bag because she was going into the local daycare centre in Gorey the following day. And anyone who has got an older person in their lives or grew up with an older person will recognise this kind of that bag scenario. A bunch of daffodils to start of spring, the Ireland's own, and St Brigid's crosses. Little crosses to bring in to all our friends. That's one of the really powerful things that I liked about St Brigid's Day, and the idea of marking St Brigid's Day was that lovely connection to the home. And that's really, really important for me. And I suppose for many, many people, that's a great thing. And that's what I always kind of find that St. Brigid put St. Patrick's Day in the halfpenny place in some ways, especially for country people, because it was much more, it involved you going out to the fields, it involved you going out and getting rushes, it involved you calling into the kitchen that evening and making crosses. So that's an interesting one for me. Come here, Brigid, Breed, there's many different spellings of it. One of the great things, which I'm just going to say this to you, is if you look at our school's folklore scheme at ducas.ie, what's fantastic about the word searchability function of the school's folklore scheme from 37-38 is we can go in and we can get an abundance of stories from all over Ireland, right? And that's what's fantastic about the word searchability. But now you can go in and get bits and pieces and so much stuff. And in particular, I find a lot of stuff in Donegal, Mayo and Galway. Donegal in particular and Cavan, you'll see crop up very, very strong, right? A lot of the western counties are very, very strong, in particular Donegal. Sadly, we don't have that same access to that resources in the likes of Derry and Fermanagh. But Donegal, you'll see it is very strong. It's an interesting one, even the word Imbolg and Imbolg, there's different pronunciations of it these days. It's interesting to see that the word wasn't actually in the vernacular. It was there in the past, but it wasn't in the vernacular. It's in the vernacular now in the last number of years. But for a lot of older people, my grandmother and people that I would meet, the word wasn't there, right? So that's another interesting little thing as well. Just as a little aside, just have a look at as a word and what words were used and what words weren't used. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to show you a little video I recorded in Donegal in 2010, and just women in Donegal tell me about some of the lovely rich traditions, very, very loads of rituals around the day around St. Brigid's Eve, and the rituals around gathering the rushes and when the crosses were made. So I'm going to press play in a video, and I'm going to be going back between photographs and videos to you, but I said I'll start off with Donegal first with you because it's of all the counties I've found it probably has the richest connection to Brigid, even though Kildare is a heartland for herself, but I found the variation Donegal had the strongest. So this is a little compilation of interviews from Donegal. I'll press play here for you.
Well, in our area, the St. Brigid's crosses are made on the feast of the eve of St. Brigid's, and you would gather now. I know some neighbours would gather together in one house, and somebody would go out and say a prayer, before you come into the house, carrying the rushes with them. And during the cross making, they would have poundies, which is mashed potatoes and onions and butter, lovely butter.
Mm-hmm. And then there'll be a cross made for sort of the house and also for all the outhouses outside, the byres or the stable for the horse or, places like that there to protect the animals throughout the year as well. That's the general idea, doing kind of a thing, And if there's any old person in the area that wouldn't be able to make one, you do extra ones for them or whatever,
Yes, well, I still make them, and I would cut the rushes off. There was any around the garden where there's plenty, and on the night before the 31st, and I would make my crosses that evening, and I would put them out before bedtime, before 12, and I would have a little bit of cloth, or some sort of white scarf, and I would put them all into a bowl and put a big stone top them so it was a stormy night, they wouldn't blow away, and leave them out on the windowsill all night, and St Brigid come during the night and bless them. And then the cloth would have, if you had any sores or that during the year, sore throats or any sores, especially the children, that we rub this little bit of cloth on them.
You used to have to cut the rushes, the head of the house normally did that, before the sun went down on the 31st of January. And then he came to the back door and he called out for the people in the house to go on their knees and to welcome St Brigid in. And he called out 3 times and the household answered. And then he opened the door, came in, and then we waited until the sun was well set. We had poundage first. You had the shave of rushes under the table. And then after that, when you had the meal, everybody tied a few rushes around their head, band, something to do with headaches. And then you made so many crosses, depending on how many buyers you had. If you had an old neighbour that didn't make ones, you would make ones for them as well. And we'd normally bless them. Somebody in the house would bless them themselves, but now it's a custom taken to the church. But not at that time, when I was growing up.
Now, isn't that just lovely? That you'd make the crosses and you would be blessed in the house themselves. Nowadays, people take them to the church, and that tradition is very strong as well, of the idea of people leaving out their crosses for Bridget to bless them and bless the Braddock as she went by that night. Loads of gorgeous, rich material there from County Donegal. And I'm sure one of the great things about this area of work is we can search online for material and access archives and this, that, and the other. But I keep saying to people, talk to your neighbours, talk to your family members. The content is there, the material is there. Sometimes we just don't ask, right? And sometimes the people who have it don't realise they have it and how valuable it is to them. So that's what's lovely about that. The St Brigid that we're talking about here is the St Brigid from County Louth, the 5th century saint. And as some of you know, whatever, the thing is, tonight we will make our St. Bridget's crosses and we'll put them up, and the women from Donegal mentioned as well, I'll touch on it later on, the idea of putting up our crosses in the byres or in our, as they call them in Donegal, or just in our cows to protect our cows. And Bridget was a woman for many things. She was she had associations with wisdom and with fire, with song, with craftsmanship, with poetry, with beer, and especially around animals, especially in country areas where I grew up and other counties as well. There was a strong association with Bridget and protection of animals, but also protection of the home against fire. If you look at a photograph here of a neighbour of mine down the road here in Wexford, you'll always find the St. Bridget's cross over a door, at a threshold, over at a height. Likewise, you'll have the piece of blessed palm brought in. Likewise, a blessed palm at Easter was brought in. The Bridget's crosses in some cases were brought in, and they were burnt. The old ones were burnt and were replenished with new ones. Again, rituals that depended on village to village and area to area. One thing that I like about this, and I keep saying this, and I'm delighted at the idea of this Bridget and the national holiday. I liked it. For me, again, growing up in the countryside, was I love the idea of going out and getting rushes. Right, I loved it as a child, and now that I've got children myself, there's one of the things that I like doing. Maybe they don't like doing it, but I like going out to the fields and kind of get a burst of fresh air into you and getting rushes. There was my little one the other day collecting rushes, and what was interesting as well, even in the last number of years, documenting your own. This is our little ones collecting them last year, and even watching your own family grow and them going out with you collecting the rushes. Here was one of the lovely things which I learned, actually. We didn't practice it growing up, but I've learned it, and I always liked it, that the youngest of the house brings the rushes in. So here's my little one, Nan, bringing the rushes into the house to make the crosses on the 31st. Here she is last year, and here she is this year. So even just to look back at yourselves and look back at that, and that's what to me is very, very strong about this idea of the home aspect and of the day being marked, and not a big St. Patrick's Day event where it's a parade as such, or where it's a big day of watching traffic in a town. This is much deeper. And crosses were made. Some of you will probably do this yourselves and probably have done it this evening. Your crosses were made that night. There were different styles of crosses, which I'll show you in a while. But again, the idea of people making them in their homes, which is lovely. The idea which the Donegal women touched on, is the idea of making them and giving them to an elderly person that mightn't have them. That's all really, really rich material. Likewise, when I talked at Christmas with you, the idea of getting a bit of holly and bringing it to your elderly neighbours, that lovely sense of community is there. And that's what I really like about it. And even again, looking at creating these slides today for you. I'm watching my own children growing up in a matter of a couple of years, the concentration of them getting older every year. One of the little ones here with her grandfather a couple of years ago making bridges crosses. So there's a lovely aspect to it which I really like. One of the things which it's an interesting one actually as well in some ways, and I was only thinking about this today myself, was the idea of Brigid being associated with art and craft and design. And it's an interesting one that actually at this time of year, that's what we do. We turn with our hands to make stuff, to cut stuff, to bend stuff, to twist stuff, to make these objects, to make these gorgeous objects. And there's more and more people making them. And it's an interesting one as well that, like, in some ways, it was actually a primary school teacher who taught me, and I'm sure there was a lot of primary school teachers who taught so many of us growing up in the 1970s and 80s, and I'm sure that was passed on as well. And that's an interesting thing, the idea of crafts and technique and things being passed on from generation to generation. So that's a really interesting aspect that I like about this as well, the element of art and craft within this tradition. One of the things which some of you may be aware of was the idea that you would leave your crosses out that night for Brigid to bless. That was the idea. You leave them out with a blue cloth or a red cloth or a white cloth. It all depended. It was nothing fixed, right? One of the great things about working in the area of folklore is that things aren't fixed. Sometimes people get very fixed. I met a woman the other day and she was telling me, very fixed, this is what this is for, and I was going, no, but someone else might do it differently than that, right? So go easy on things being fixed, I think, with beliefs, because they chop and change depending on who you are and how you interpret them yourselves, right? And you can see there my dog was there. So that's the kind of general tradition I've found around the country, and these things are spreading more and more around the country with the advent of social media and talks and this, that and the other, and radio and television media and different interests, where people are learning, oh God, we're learning new things, and that's all okay. We don't have to, this is the one thing I find about folklore and traditions, we don't have to try to source all our stuff back to the year dot. It's okay if you learned it from a school teacher in 1975. It's okay if you learned something from a neighbor in 1983. That's all okay. And I keep saying that to people. Sometimes that's where our experience starts. So we don't, sometimes it bothers me a little bit when we try to go back into the depths of time to try to understand everything. And sometimes we miss the point. We miss what's happening in front of us then, and actually just accepting that contemporary reality that's in front of us. So here we are leaving out our crosses. We woke up that morning, there was a bit of snow that night. I leave them out for Brigid to bless. Here's some of that cloth actually here now, the Brat breed. Some people would use a red cloth, more people use white. A lot of people would have belief that this piece of cloth would be used for headaches. I recorded a woman in Clonmel once who said she got a needle in her finger and she tied the Brat breed or the Brattock around her finger, and it drew out that's the story she had. She believed that it drew out the needle, right? So people will use different things for different purposes. This is my own grandmother's box that I came across about 2 years ago. I was rooting through stuff belonged to her, and I found her piece of red flannel. And here was one thing as well, we kind of forget all these dates there are all these layers built upon each other. And I said to you at the start, tomorrow is the start of spring in Ireland. It's a start, again, it's 3 months exactly from the start of winter, and 3 months exactly from the start from Bealtaine for the start of May, where we put up our May bushes and all our crops are grown. So they're tied in. There's a very old calendar here that we're basing a lot of these things on. A lot of it would be tied in religious sense, would be tied into Candlemas Day and St Blaise's Day, but St Brigid falls in there within a very Irish context, even though she is celebrated in other countries and on this day outside of Ireland, but very few. Brigid is a very particular Irish story in this case. But here's another Brigid for you, Brigid Tunney from Donegal. She was down in her house in 2020. And she told me a great story about the Brattock or the red flannel. There's a lot of older Irish people will remember, probably still would have it, a piece of red flannel. A piece of red flannel was kept and used. This was my grandmother's. It was used for chesty coughs. It was used for, sometimes it was actually a piece of red flannel with a slit in it, pulled over children's heads around protection of the throat and the chest. And again, a lot of our things around St Blaise's Day and Candlemas Day are tied in with that as well. So there are a lot of layers all mixed in, which are there without trying to understand them. But here's Brigid Tunney telling us a gorgeous story about an incident that happened in 1930s Donegal. I'm going to move my screen to the side here and get Brigid's story up. It's about the Brattock breed. Now, please tell me where it is now. And I can't see it, and you know what, I'm not going to look for it, so I'll tell you about it, right, just as I when you're there. Bridget told us a story that it was her grandmother. There was a, this is the story that she had. On this night, her grandmother would always leave out the jumpers and coats of the children, and they'd leave them out in the washing line for the, or wherever they hung the clothes out for Bridget to bless. And the story goes that Bridget had was that there was a drowning in Lough Swilly and the body couldn't be found. So someone approached her grandmother and asked her for a loan of one of the children's coats that had been blessed. So the people went out with the boat. And again, this is a story, you take whatever way you want this story, but this is the story Bridget told me. And that's the great thing about this, is that she said that the boat went out and they took the jumper and they put it into the water and they watched it and they watched it. And after a while it moved, and said it went to a place in Lough Swilly and sank. And a few minutes later, or a while later, some divers went down and they found the body. And the story was then the person was buried and someone came back and gave the jumper back to Bridget's grandmother. And that's the story. That's this idea of the power of this garment. But people do have this great belief in this piece of cloth, whether it's a red flannel or a blue flannel or white flannel, that is there, and that association is there with Bridget. One thing, I was just chatting to Breed before I came on, and I was just talking about the Brigidine sisters. I suppose we're very lucky here in some ways that the Brigidine sisters are very important. Bridget herself is a nun, and they were very important in the story of Bridget through education and through telling of the story of Bridget since over the last nearly 200 years at this stage. It's hard to imagine that in 1807 that they set up a convent in Tullow in County Carlow, 1807, which is very, very early, and carried on with years of education then. And they had a really strong part in the telling of the story of Bridget. And likewise also the St Brigid in County Kildare. If any's ever in County Kildare, I would recommend you pay a visit to that. And they have kept the story of going, the nuns there have kept that story of Bridget going in the last number of years, well, since in 1807 in Ireland and also all over the world. I actually took this, I was in the centre there a couple of years ago, and I took a photograph of this, of different crosses they had left out. And I suppose when we think of different crosses, we think of the standard or the classic St Brigid's cross that so many of my generation grew up with. And that's because probably due to this thing, due to the advent of radio television, and this was the symbol that was adopted. Now, it's a fantastic design, brilliant design, but if you know, and it's a very old design, but there are many more. But if you see, I'm holding in my hand, I'm holding a straw cross. It's interesting, even the materials. If you look back to the earlier slide there, we can see that there were rushes made. And the classic story that so many of us grew up with was that rushes were made in the bogs of Kildare and Bridget picked them off the floor. But you'll also find a lot of straw was used. A lot of straw was used in the making of our crosses. And it's an interesting one, and it can puzzle me for a couple of years. Here's a photograph from William Green from County Antrim, and it's in the Enumene up north. And I was trying to get my head around with straw. And a straw cross is a lovely cross, by the way. It's a much stronger cross than the rushes. And but you probably, anyone who's involved in farming knows anything about farming, most of the straw now is baled in late July, August, and there wouldn't be a bit left standing in a field come the 1st of February. But one of the things which is really interesting to know is that there were spring trashings at this time of year, and that there were the straw was used then. I'll show you examples of what a spring trashing was. The oats in particular was trashed for grain, which is going to be used then for growing in the fields come March, and then cut again come the end of August again, before the combines were about. Different designs as well. Just I want to show you as well. Here's a design a neighbour of mine has this. We call this a Waterford cross, but the people in Donegal, I'm sure, will call it a Donegal cross. This neighbour of mine, Denny Hanlon, with a lovely Waterford cross that he got in Dungarvan in West Waterford about 30 or 40 years ago. What's great about it, as you can see, is that it uses lollipop sticks, art and crafts at its finest. And this uses rushes, and this is a very particular design. You'll see it still in Donegal, and it's interesting just to know how these things survived. And what's really interesting, I love this photograph of Denny's hands. He works the whole time with his hands, and just the darkness and the oil on his hands, and the lovely delicacy of the colour of the rush. I think it's a rush, not a straw. I think it's a rush. But the gas thing is, on the likes of social media has been a powerful tool, even with my own work on the folklore.ie page. It's a great place for sharing, but also getting back information, getting back source information. And that's really key here, is source information, not something with someone will read in a book, but actually someone who's practiced something. But no sooner did I put up that photograph of Denny this time last year, straight away, the son of this woman, Peg O'Regan, said, my mother made those crosses. And Peg passed away in 1999, and Peg was known in West Waterford for making these crosses. It's incredible that you think of these people, and in particular women who were involved in passing on these traditions to us, you know, and we've kept that kind of craft, the craft of the whole thing alive. And also someone from Donegal contacted me, said, here's one from Donegal, from Francis Doherty's in Donegal, again, 50-year-old, handmade, you know, battered, held together with sellotape. But again, that's what's lovely about it. There's a lovely rawness to it. The bits of a sally here, sharpened with a penknife or whatever, bits not really well finished there. But that's what's lovely about it, and what I suppose what that symbol means to people. Here's a rough version I made last year myself. It's very interesting to see the crossover with the Mexican, the eye, that symbol of that wrapping is very similar. You get it in a lot of Mexican culture as well, which is an interesting thing. I don't know how, you know, it could just be a natural crossover. But just back to the straw thing, I said I'd show you these photographs. This thing here is a corn stand, and this is from the school's, this is from the National Folklore Collection. It's Albert Eskerod's photograph from 1930 something in South Wexford. But if you can see here, you'll see that all the little ricks, the straw, or the oaten straw, was kept up on these things called haggard stands, and you get them around the country, whatever, everywhere in the country had them, depending on, I suppose, the grain grown, you know, more places that had different designs. But this is one that we came across in South Carlow there a couple of years ago. But what would happen was the grain was trashed in early spring, and then the sheaves would be used. So the leftover straw would be used for making crosses, but also for making bridge old dolls. And I'll show you examples of that in Clare, where a sheaf was dressed up as a little woman that was brought around. I'll show you an example of that. There's a haggard stand. That's a solid one. While here are kind of more mushroom ones, as they're called. This is from East Galway, and they would have had capstones on top of those, and it would have been raised up. So just that got rid of the puzzle within my mind for a couple of years about how did we have straw on the 1st of February. Actually, there's a great account by Patrick Kennedy of a spring trashing. And he said, what stag or fox hunt can equal in interest a chase of the next 2 minutes with its accompaniment of bark, shouts and laughter, which has to be repeated every 5 minutes till the bottom layer is removed. He's on about a trashing, in a spring trashing, and all the animals and cats and dogs watching what was going on. That's from 1869 here in Wexford. An interesting one as well, just to show you, is we've so many different types of bridges crosses. If you look over here, you'll see a palm cross made of palm. This is a Jim Gavin up in Galway a couple of years ago, was in his home. But what's lovely, you see a classic St Brigid's cross here. But if you look over Jim's head here, where I'm hovering here, you'll see a little cross nailed to the rafters. You'll also see a piece of blessed palm. Again, people bring these into their home for protection against fire in particular was one of the things. But here's a lovely little cross that Jim showed me that he made. And again, he didn't learn it from a book, he learned it from his father. And it's a little piece, 2 pieces of sally, and just wrapped around like that. Absolutely gorgeous. And he said, again, a piece of trusty sellotape. I know people mightn't agree with it, but it's lovely. It worked for him, and it kept the thing together for him. There's his little rafter cross. Now that's an interesting thing that people don't realize as well. I've seen it in Mayo, seen it in Galway, seen it in Clare, seen it, heard of it in North Wexford, didn't see it, of little crosses. Now here's a photograph that a friend sent to me, Kate Teasby in Clare, of a derelict house close to where she lives. And every St. Brigid's Eve, the people would make a little cross and nail it to the rafters. And as you can see, they would nail them to the rafters. Some would be little ornate, little designed, little bits cut out, more would be very simple. So there were different types of St. Brigid's crosses. And again, in this case, nailed to the rafters for, I'd say, more than likely protection against fire, probably back to the days of thatched roofs and things like that. Here's another photograph from Clare. This is Louise Rosengrave sent it to me. She renovated an old cottage there, and when she went in, she discovered these on the walls. She didn't know what they were. She later found out, and she kept them there. She didn't remove them. It's amazing. St. Brigid's crosses nailed to the walls, up around the backs of the doors, up the ceilings, right? So it's interesting. We have different styles of St. Brigid's crosses around the country. rather than the classic standard rush cross that we've all become so popular with over the years. This is my grandmother's house actually in Wexford. I used to document her house because I also found it very, very just interesting. She didn't take down her crosses and burn them. She just kept them up. But one of the gas things, and I could be shot for saying this, she loved plastic straw crosses. These were made back in the late 1980s by us as children, but she thought they were the bee's knees, and she kept them up every year, you know. So I think, again, it's all about belief, folks. It's all about what you believe in and what does the job for you. In this case, her plastic straws did it for her. And again, some people now just more and more just kind of craft and make and going on at schools. There's a friend of mine, Quiva Dunn, made these last year in workshops with old newspapers, rolled up old newspapers, made into almost pipe cleaners. Perfect thing for schools. So we're seeing more and more of this, which is brilliant to see. And I'm guaranteed we'll see more of it in years to come, of this idea of making these objects. Interesting as well, actually, when I spent a bit of time in Newfoundland, they actually also have a St Brigid's cross brought over by the Southeast Irish, late 1700s, early 1800s, and but they don't make them or rushes to make them out of a thing called a bog iris or a flagger. That's what they make them out, right? Interesting. Here's an interesting one, because Brigid is associated with protection of animals, particularly cows in particular, and dairies. And I record this woman, Alice Sheehan, up and go. And this lovely account at the very end. I'm going to just let you listen to it. She was on about a house or farm that were having bad luck with animals. There were calves dying, and she brought around the St. Brigid's cross. And when she brought around the cross and put it in the barn, this is what she said happened. So I'm going to stick on Alice Sheehan now for you. And I hope you're still with me. I won't play the whole interview. I'll just play a little bit for you. And it's about there.
All my nieces and nephews were going to school, and they came home with St. Brigid's cross. And I tell you, very good one. A neighbour, it'd be a cousin of my sister's husband's, Joe Ireton, came out to visit one night. And he was a connection, close connection, came out, and he would come regularly for a little visit. But he came this night. How are things, Joe? How are things going with Joe, and how are you getting on? God, not good at all. He says, I'm losing a lot of the cattle. They're dying with me. And I listened, and oh, poor Granny was alive then. Well, do you know what you'll do, Joe? Take home a St. Brigid's cross with you. And what's that about, said Joe. So the Granny explained to him, you know, you take this out with you and you put it up in the cow house or wherever, in the cattle house or whatever, and keep it there. So Joe said, yes, fair enough. He says, I'll do that. So they chatted away and had his cup of tea, and it was time for Joe to head for home. And Granny says, have you got your cross now? Yes, he says, I have it down here in my pocket. So poor old Joe come on, and he hopped up on his little tractor and headed for home. And it was just the two of them in the house, Joe and Robbie. And there were two brothers, never got married. And Joe would knock around a little bit, but Robbie was a quieter type of man. He would nearly always be at home. But Joe says, I'll go ahead now and I'll get home to poor Rob. So he came in along anyway, and he says, I wonder what will I do? I think I'd hang up the cross first, he says, before I go in. So he went on over to the house, anyhow, to the cow house, and he put up the St. Brigid's cross. And he says, I'll go in along now and I'll see how Robbie is. So he come in along anyhow, and we're talking and chatting. And by and by, there was this awful commotion. An extraordinary commotion went on in the yard, which they never witnessed or experienced before. And hadn't all the cattle broke out of their bales and out onto the yard and around, and they were roaring and going wild. So poor Joe rushed out and tried his best to settle him down and get him back in. And to the day he died, he would tell you that story. And what he put it down to, he said it was the devil was in the house, and he must have been not wanting to go, but they got him out. They got him out of it. He'd say that. He'd tell that story to anyone who come along. The cross, yeah, got rid of him.
Now, I'll end the story there. Again, it's about, folks, it's all about power of belief. It's about what people believe. But it's interesting to see that the tradition wasn't there in the community. It was there, as Alice pointed out, brought from the children from school and then passed through her, and she passed on to Joe. So it's an interesting, sometimes again, some things are not always in the depths of time. And again, it's a very, very powerful story, and she's a lovely storyteller. What's really interesting was I actually was in the yard of the two men about 4 months ago, right? I didn't put two and two together. I was brought to see a dresser in a house, and I walked in at the dresser, and then I realized, hang on, this is the same two men that I was told a story about. And I couldn't help it. I went up and I saw the memory cards of the two men, but beside the two men, I spotted this on the dresser beside it. St Brigid's cross, and I'm sure that St Brigid's cross was there from the time of when they first had going back to that story, when there was one made the following year. But it really stuck with me. And I walked into the bales of the old house, where the cows used to be tied up, just to see it. You know, it was just to be there. It's interesting about this protection of cattle, and cattle were always important in Ireland anyway. They always start with even our May folklores around the protection of milk and butter, and even to this day, what might surprise you, this is a photograph from a friend of mine called Owen Dunbar. You'll see people hanging up pieces of ivy. You go into a lot of farmer sheds and there'll be ivy hanging up over where the cows are, to say to protect against ringworm. So there's that great belief thing is still there, and I guarantee you will go into farms around the country, you would find St Brigid's crosses to this day hidden in different places. Just the imagery, that connection. Again, we can't go into great depth here, but here's an image which we're told is of St Brigid milking a cow in Glastonbury. St Brigid's connected to Glastonbury. She's connected throughout Europe. There's different associations with different bridges in Brittany and France and England. Also over in Germany as well, again, St Brigid here, and this association with Brigid with animals and livestock. Here she's with cattle again. While also there's a French manuscript from the 1300s. And again, here we have Brigid here with an animal. So that connection to animals is very, very strong. And as you can hear from Alistair, and even to this day, it's very, very strong in Ireland still. Another thing which is interesting was, if we can't have a feast day, all our feast days, in particular, if we were going into from Christmas, Halloween, All Hallows Eve, feasting with nuts and fruit and cakes and bar and brack and call cannon. Likewise even with Lunas, a lot of feasting as well going on there, and even I suppose Christmas Eve as well. But also around St Brigid's Eve, again, the women in Donegal will always talk about poundies, eating poundies with onions, mashed potatoes with onions, were pounded by those lovely wooden pounders. So the feasting aspect was important. I was talking to a woman the other day who went to a school taught by nuns, and she was on about that element around St Brigid's Day. It was always sweet. She said she always remembered those loads of sweets on that day. One aspect which is a very strong, again, mostly the Western counties, but also I find it down here in Laois and parts of North Kilkenny and in Carlow as well, was the idea of mummers, of St Brigid's Day mummers, or biddy boys as they were known. And this idea, like in Halloween, like in St Stephen's Day, of going out dressed up and calling and looking for something, looking for money, looking for food on that day, not the eve. It wasn't intended to be this evening, it was tomorrow evening, where people would dress up. Young lads mostly boys and mostly men would dress up, and they would call around. Here's some women from Mayo tell me about it a couple of years ago, and I'll show you some photographs of it then, and they'll just recall what they remember.
The numbers would come on Stephen's night as a rule. Stephen's night, they'd have the accordion and the dancer set and all that.
That's the
And then in St Brigid's night they come as well. Yeah.
And they'd sing the rhythm, "Heal St Brigid, dressed in white, give us the money to honour."
Yeah. The mummers wouldn't have the doll, but the kids would. That have a white image, you know. Image of white.
Money was scarce that time.
A lovely woman. Money was scarce that time. And we're on about a little doll. In the same way as we go, as I mentioned before, under Ran, you'd bring out a little bird in a bush. You also would carry out a little bird, a little doll, a little breedjog, a little small breed. Sometimes she was this size, sometimes she was bigger, and she was brought out, and she would be paraded into the house, and you would play songs and music. And as herself was saying, here is St Brigid dressed in white, give us some money to honor her night or their night. And there's another little bit to that as well, right? But you'll get this. These are great photographs from Kerry of Homer Sykes took. back in the 1970s of the bridge joke being brought around, of young lads dressed up. It's fantastic to see. They'll have their straw mask, but lots of 1970s plastic visitor on their faces as well. So there's lovely mix of layers there, dressed up in pajamas, dressed up, sometimes their faces completely covered, sometimes not. Here's a photograph by John Coffey of bridge jogs in a tie in County Kildare in 1979. Again, fantastic homemade DIY dressing up, bright colours, plastic masks, all loads of layers and loads of mixing going on. Likewise, these photographs are from John Heaton in Laois, again of a biddies by night, where the lads would literally come in for a hoolie. Again, mostly men and some women as well, dressed up and dancing, and that's just fantastic photographs. John runs a pub, so he's interested in history and able to photograph what was going on. These are biddy boys, men in this case, dressed up and coming up in a biddy boy dance that night. I got these photographs from Dara Spillane during only today, and it was only made the last couple of days, of a bridge jogs being made in Clare, in West Clare, and absolutely gorgeous. You can see the sheaf. There was mention of the sheaf. A lot of the little bridge jogs were made with sheaves of oaten straw. And again, back to the spring traditions again, and little purses, sometimes little purses, dressed in kind of light colours, sometimes white, sometimes almost like a little communion dress. And I've sent these photographs as well from herself. She made them in a school and a scanner with children, and were left in the local church to be blessed. Absolutely gorgeous to see this, right? And we've got the Chris Breed there as well. But I love the look of these with the straw there. Again, I'm only touching on things here with you, but just to give you the idea, these things are still in little pockets around the place. The great thing about, I suppose, nowadays where we've got mobile phones in our pockets, someone can take a photograph in clear and I can have it in 2 seconds, or vice versa. So that's a great thing about that. Just to show you as well, in Killargan and Kerry, the bridge jogs, they still go out. Just interesting to watch. They've got that kind of uniform also, the shared uniform of the Wren boys with the straw boy hats, which were traditionally worn for weddings, but they've kind of got little crosses here on their jumpers. There's great footage from RTE, the RTE archives of this as well. I don't know if I've got time to show you, but it's just interesting to watch it, because you will see it's almost quite formal. The Kerry fellows go in for this kind of formal parade stuff, a lot of competition between different areas as well. But you'll see here are there's a Drolene's fellows. Where is a Carrick-and-Keary in Limerick, southwest Limerick. Again, but there's interesting things just to watch out, folks, for as well. I kind of find, if you look at, say, the biddy boys here, look at the uniform aspect, look at the Wren boy, the uniform aspect, look at the mummin aspect here in Wexford. The Wexford mummers plays a very strong uniform aspect to it there. That's especially when there's a parade element involved in it, compared to the chaps that I showed you going in dress up, calling to the houses with make and do. So there are two very, very distinctive, very, very different types of approaches to the biddy boys. When it becomes a parade, it becomes very formal and very set, while when you have the house calling, it's much more loose and informal, which I always prefer, I'll be honest with you, but it's great to see. Here's a little thing that we used to make with my own grandmother at the end of the night, actually, after we've made all our bridges, crosses, the rushes that were left on the floor, you'd pick them up and you get your finger, and we call them a bridge jog, but they're very different in the bridge jogs in Clare. Get your finger, tie it on it, tie this rush around it, and tie 1, 2, 3, 4 knots on it, and then basically cut it off, and you had a little doll. That's another lovely little thing. And again, whoever makes them, they'll make them differently, and that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty about any kind of art or any kind of crafts, and that's, there's nothing fixed. I'm looking at my own images here for you now. This is actually a cross in Cabinteely, St Brigid's cross. There's very few physical statues and things of Bridget around Ireland. We tend to go for the wells, we tend to go for the place names. But I came across recently, in the centre of Spain, St Brigid's Day is marked, and they call her the Irish Bridget. Now I know she's marked in Portugal as well. Her day is marked in Portugal. I say part of her skull is in Portugal. But this is an interesting one just to the east of Madrid. St Brigid is taken out on the 1st of February, the same day as here, and she's paraded through the town, brought back in, and they produce, it's actually going on this year, but one thing that they do is they make these kind of cakes with cheese, a kind of a savoury cake with cheese, and they're given out to people. And in the past, they were given out to the poorer people, and the rich people then would come together and auction off loads of their objects and sometimes their foodstuffs to raise money to pay for this looking after of the poor. The auction part is really, really strong and still going on to this day. So that's an interesting one to keep an eye out. Keep an eye out for that tradition that goes on the, and the say it goes back to medieval times in this part of Spain. Likewise, as I said to you, it's St Brigid's Day is marked in Lisbon, just outside Lisbon as well, in Portugal. That's another thing to keep an eye out for. They say that part of our school was taken from Ireland, our school was taken from Ireland down to Portugal, and that's where it's remained in a shrine. Interesting to know that part of it was actually brought back to Ireland in the 1920s, I think around 1929. And here's some great footage that I won't show to you on British Pate of the building of the church in God, the place escapes me now. It's in oh God, the name escapes me. It's in Dublin. There's three great clips. It's very, very male, as you'll see yourselves. But part of the school was brought back in that kind of Catholic kind of parade element. Very, very strong. But I think the relic was. I was reading recently that it was stolen. I don't know whether it was ever recovered or not, but that's another interesting link to that connection back down to Portugal and Spain. There's the block being blessed for the building of the church. Aside from the big churches and that element to me, which is not me really, one thing that I've seen which happening in the last couple of years is that on a really ground level, this is a photograph that Derek Ryan put up last night on his Facebook page, and people are actually beginning to research locally on the ground. Holy wells associated with Brigid, place names associated with Brigid. So that's one thing that I hope which is going to happen in the years to come, is this very localized information will crop up. Even in County Clare, they're launched tomorrow night. They're launching a great project on the Holy Wells of County Clare, and obviously the St Brigid's well near the Cliffs of Moher. There is a very, very well known well, and there's hundreds. I think there's hundreds of wells that have been documented. But that's what's great to see. I think hopefully in time we'll see crop up and more of this will happen. Even my own, where I grew up myself on the east coast of Wexford, even to visit St Brigid's well. Here's my father. These were taken in 2010, these photographs. There was a well dedicated to St Brigid there, which that they used as children, but obviously in times went on, cattle were let in, but the well disappeared and people stopped using it. But it's interesting, whatever, that he took me there back in 2010. He's passed away since, just to show me where, I knew where the well was, but he wanted to show me exactly where there was two wells, the drinking water well and the holy well, where both of them were. And literally with the prods of a spade, he got the water flowing again, in the bottle of a Coke bottle. But what's interesting is that power of that water. And here's me, we brought all neighbours back to that site as well. And as you can see, there's no shortage of rushes in that part of Wexford, but the fields behind is very, very wet. So you can see why it's associated with Brigid. But what's interesting actually, just when you think of water at St Brigid, I remember on my own grandmother's deathbed, the three things she asked for was water from the holy wells that she visited as a child. So it's there's something very, very deep and something very personal with this, with her connection to the earth and connection to the, I suppose the female connection to the earth and the earth of water, which. It's there in us, it's there in us, and I suppose I'm happy happy in a place like this any day of the week. Again, if you go to lugannon.ie, you can just even put in like place names with Brigid mentioned them. All this stuff, I think, in the years to come, with the marking of the national holiday, will all unfold in front of us. This is going to be a really interesting time for us, because we'll see it happen at a local level and a national level. This idea of Brigid, and the mark that Brigid has left in Ireland, but also the mark she's left outside of Ireland. Here's St Kilbride in Newfoundland. Here is there's also in Sydney, in Australia, New Zealand, places with Brigid's name, all to do with St Brigid, all to do with this figure Brigid. I'm going to round up I think I'm nearly getting close to the end here. So one thing I just mentioned this is that those layers that I spoke about they're there when you go looking. They're very easy, right? But St. Brigid's Day is coming tomorrow, the 1st of February. 2nd day of February is Candlemas Day. And even things like this, half your prog, there's a saying we had here in Wexford, and I've come across it in Newfoundland as well, half your prog, half your hay, eat your supper by the light of day. There were little sayings that we developed that we'd know. Prog is a great word for provisions. So at this time of year, you would assess things. Half your provisions, half your hay, you'd eat your supper by the light of day. And that's the thing, because what was happening? The evenings are getting brighter, the mornings are getting brighter, and you can eat your supper by the light of day. So there are little things we that we've been hanging on this date, this particular date, for a very, very long time. This is again this box of my own grandmother's where I found our crosses in it, but I also found our candles from Candlemas Day. Interestingly, in Newfoundland, this idea of, I think light is very important with the story of Bridget, and the idea of spring coming and the light coming, and the evenings are obviously much brighter now. In Newfoundland, which is an interesting one, which was done here, died out here, was the idea that you would light your blessed candles and you would drop 4 pieces of wax onto your boots, your work shoe, or your work jacket, your tools, even on a chainsaw. It doesn't look too health and safety wise, doesn't look great, but that's what you would do all around protection. 4 drops of wax. And again, in this case, it was very religious, in the name of Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and that's the case in Newfoundland. But it's going on. I notice it in homes in Newfoundland, on dishwashers, on washing machines, everywhere you'd see these 4 drops of wax. The gas thing is, though, you go into some Irish farms and you go into dairies, what do you spot? You'll see a St Brigid's cross, but you'll also see a blessed candle. And light was really important this time of year as well. Here's a little saying as well, and I'll get towards the end of it now. If Candlemas Day be fair and bright, winter will have another fight. But if Candlemas Day brings cloud and rain, winter will not come again. So there was a great turn. There was that turning point again in the year. Winter hopefully is behind us and spring is ahead of us. And this is what it's about, folks, in some ways. Really, if we strip it right back in the story of Bridget, is that spring is there. We all know it. Anyone living in Ireland in particular will know we start to spot it. Our first snowdrops have came up. We start to spot daffodils coming out. And we start to sort of lambs in the field, right? And that's what's really important. Life has started. The earth has woken up. She's woken up, and we're ready for another turn of that year again, where we can grow our crops and have our food come from the winter and set ourselves up for the following winter. I'll end with this one. We got a little pet lamb for the kids here 3 years ago, and we got her, and she was born on St. Brigid's Day. So you can guess what we called her, Bridget. So here we are picking her up. And as you can see from yourself, when there's a bit of life and a bit of things like that, people are happy. And here she is dressed up in a little jumper. And every year the children make her a little bit of a cross or make her something to mark her birthday. So tomorrow we're going to make her a birthday cake made with rich tea, her favorite cake. So there you have it. There's a very quick ramble through St. Brigid and the life and different things that we do to mark this special time in our year in Ireland. So I could show you loads more, but I won't. So, but if you have any questions, I think Bree's going to come back in a second, because I'm very conscious of time and getting me out the door on time, folks.
Thanks, Michael. That was great, actually. And as you say, I think we'll all learn a lot more about St. Brigid in the next while. There are a few questions or comments here, and I'll just bring them to you now. One, Joe says, I did a piece on the traditions associated with Bridget. I am from Kerry myself and have a few Bridget straw biddy hats from the Kilgobnet area. And Joe's in Boston, actually. Here I got connected to the native traditions, and that has given me an interesting insight into our own traditions of the 4 corners and the 3 worlds. That's a comment there. Somebody, do people link St. Brigid to the goddess Bridget in practice, or is that strictly an academic notion?
Yeah, it's a good question. There are loads of things cropping up. Breed, I'll be honest with you, and I don't know. I don't know. There's a bit of there's a lot of joining dots of late, I've noticed, and some of them are a bit scareways. Sometimes I think I'm a great believer, and we don't have to understand everything. If I hope, and that's not giving a lazy answer. Sometimes what's laid out and happening in front of us is what is really interests me, and what people are doing, what's really interesting me, rather than having to go back to try to understand. Now, I'm sure that could be a different talk, but not for me. And sometimes, yeah, it's a different talk, and for different people. I think. I just noticed in the chat there, Breed, I'm delighted that church was Colester in Dublin.
Yes, yes, that's actually, I meant to say that, Michael. Two people came up with Colester in Dublin 5. So thanks actually for coming back to us on that.
No, the relic is still there as well, which is great. So thanks, Millie, for Anne who put that in. Thank you.
Somebody can go to see that. Is Bridget's Brat Breda in connection with the hawthorn tree or the rag tree? Does it have something to do with that?
No. The hawthorn tree is strongly associated with early. It's still to this day. We put up a maybush here in Wexford, very, very strong. You use traditionally a hawthorn or whitethorn or a piece of gorse. It was never brought in. The hawthorn was planted usually at, there's loads to do with hawthorn with funeral burial customs. You'll actually see a hawthorn in graveyards still. There's 1 or 2 I know in South Kildare where there's a hawthorn grown, but no, not particularly. You know, some people might do it, but most people I've come across who would throw the brat, put the brat breed out would be on a washing line or maybe out in the hedge, but mostly the washing line. But here's one thing I want, I suppose, to tell people breed as well, is that what I'm saying, there's none of this right, you know, that kind of way, you know that kind of way. People are always looking for definitive answers. Then it becomes almost like organized religion. You know, it becomes, you know, what's the great thing about folk belief is that people do things differently, and we need to say that, and there's no right and wrong. Okay.
Yeah, and it's very different in different places. Somebody has a comment here that the Waterford cross reminds them of something you see in Mexico with a wood frame and woven wool for the center. Have you seen these, or is there any connection?
Yeah, I've only seen the Mexican ones, and that kind of eye, they call them God's eye, I think they're called. Yeah, very similar. They're made in the exact same way. I've seen only single ones. I haven't seen the five. But I don't know. But it's really interesting just to look at the connection with Brigid and Spain and Portugal. So I don't know whether there was a tradition brought out there, or a craft or a way of making. I'm not sure.
And do we know why the skull or half the skull or whatever was taken to Spain? Somebody asks. It's a curious question, isn't it?
Yeah, it is an interesting one. I was only reading about it recently, actually. Again, probably not the person to answer, but the Spanish now are mad into those kind of relics anyway. Well, I suppose we are. We were to some degree as well. We have relics of St Nicholas in Kilkenny apparently. So there was always a tradition of collecting relics. It's in in Christianity, but the Spanish are mad into that kind of idea of the big procession. The Bretons are the same, you know, you'd find the leg of someone or the arm of someone, or, you know, that kind of way, whatever. But it was interesting to watch it happen in Ireland, because it just a British Pate, for the listeners here, if you go to British Pate on YouTube, you'll see 3 videos of it. It's very, very there's something missing from it with me personally, you know, that kind of way, when it just becomes a very organized male parade into the church, you know, that kind of way. There's something, it's not me, no, it's not me. Give me the wet field any day of the week, make them on the kitchen table. Now
there's lots of people getting in touch to say that they have St Brigid's well close to them, or they have they know of where the wells are. Actually, well, somebody has said they love your slides, Michael, and they'd love to show their family some of the pictures you shared. Well, the talk has been recorded actually, so so you can show them maybe online when we put it up on the NLI YouTube channel. That's where it will be. So that might be something you might want to keep an eye out for. Can you recommend any books on St Brigid? Now, there's a lot of them actually.
Yeah, I would recommend. I've got a what's his name's book again? The name is after escaping me now. The St Brigid in Kildare. I would recommend making contact with the centre. They've got they would have a good archive of books. Old books and newish books on the life of Brigid. God, there's a book I bought there myself, and the name escapes me, and it was brilliant. I'd also recommend as well, so I would recommend make contact with St Brigid in Kildare if you can. Maybe look to have an online bookshop. I would recommend that. I'd also, you know, as I keep saying to people, I can't recommend enough talking to the people around you. We have the most on you. We have traditions and customs. We don't realize we have them, and we don't value them sometimes. I'll be honest with you as well. Like I've said this for years. I'd be recording someone telling me about spreading tran water in the fields in Wexford, and I used to go back to my grandmother. Oh, someone told me a tradition about spreading tran water. Sure, I could have told you that. She says, I said, why didn't you tell me? Sure, why would you be interested in that? So they didn't value stuff. You know, there's a generation who didn't value those kind of things. So I can't recommend enough talking to people around you. That's so important. Obviously, the school's folklore scheme is a brilliant resource also for looking at stories around breed, especially in your own locality. But talking to people, that's the way to go as well.
Yeah, and try your local library. You never know. You might. Or look at the National Library catalogue, nli.ie, and you might find some interesting books there as well, guys. So that might be, you can't borrow them, of course, from the National Library, but you can get ideas as to what books are available. So that might be worth a look as well, actually, because there are lots of articles in places there. I'll just see if there's any other question here, Michael. Somebody mentions the cross is similar to the Ethiopian cross. I think you showed us quite a few crosses actually. So I suppose, you know, some of them are different, I suppose, part of the countries as well.
There's a lovely three-legged, well, it's not technically not a cross, a three-legged cross, which is becoming more popular now. You'll see that around the country. That's a gorgeous one. It's like a little triskel. It's like the wheel of life almost. That's a gorgeous one. I don't have one here in front of me, but if you can make this the classic St. Brigid's cross with rushes, you can make the three-legged one as well. As a gorgeous, gorgeous cross.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just going to send a reply to somebody there just to say that the talk will be made available on the NLI YouTube channel. Actually, that's where it will be made available from. The sun, moon, and stars for the I have seen sources that refer to the three-armed cross as the sun, moon, and stars for the briars. Have you come across this?
No, not that story, but I've come across it, and I met someone the other day who told I was showing her three-legged cross, and she was telling me what it was for as well. I don't know how contemporary. I don't know. My fear is people. I don't know breed, but I just know I like the design. It's kind of fairly obvious that it's a circle. It's like a wheel, like almost like a wheel of life in some ways. But again, it depends on how people read it and what people load onto the reading. That's always going to happen. And again, back to what I said at the start. We've all got our own different readings of things. I suppose it's whatever you get out with yourself, you know. And the most important thing is that I said that this day, next year it'll be a national holiday. We have this figure of Bridget and St. Bridget, and the marking of spring is a big day in Ireland. It's a great day, you know. I'm not losing sight of the arts and the crafts element of it. I suppose from my side, that's really, really important, you know. Yeah.
Well, I think next year we'll all have to prepare and learn or relearn how to make St. Brigid's crosses again. Actually, everybody will have to. There's some great comments here, Michael. Thank you all actually for your comments. I'll try and get some of them to Michael, because wonderful talk, interesting talk, and you know very. So thank you all actually for those comments. It seems like everybody enjoyed the talk. So, and thank you, Michael, for joining us this evening and learning more about St. Brigid. Whoops, St. Brigid. We'll have to have you back next year when it's national holiday, actually. So we'll all be celebrating the day. And as we Lá Féile Brida is the St. Brigid's Day in Irish. So enjoy the day, actually. Enjoy St. Brigid's Day. It's not a bank holiday this year, or a public holiday, I should say, but next year we'll all get to enjoy it as a public holiday. So thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks especially to Michael for his very interesting talk. And I think actually that point about listening to people that we know and hearing about the traditions that people have and that have existed for a long time is actually very wise to all of us. So enjoy everybody. And thanks again, Michael.
Thanks everybody.
Cheers. Good night, everybody.
Nice.